We have been preaching this quarter on emotions. Pastor has entitled it The Joy of Emotions. But all emotions are not joyous. Some emotions have the ability to keep us out of heaven. We've looked at joy, pride, fear, impatience. Last week, Pastor Alberg addressed depression, to name a few. Today, we're going to consider the diabolical sin of envy. It's of such importance that God included it in His 10 commandments. It's the 10th commandment. Thou shalt not covet. Envy is our modern word for coveting. Envy and coveting are synonymous. At Columbine High School, Eric Harris, along with his best friend Dylan Klebold, shot and killed 13 people and wounded 24 on April 20, 1999. Klebold and Harris didn't fit in with the dominant, popular students of their high school. It's a high school whose culture is built around sports. And those who were really great at sports were the popular young people in the high school. Their culture literally was all the sports. And these two young men apparently were very good techies. They did the computer stuff at school, but they envied the success of the school's athletes. In his journal, Klebold wrote, "I see jocks having fun, friends, and women." This is from a high school kid. In another entry, he wrote, "I hate the happiness of the jocks." For over a year, these two young men carefully planned their killing spree. They planned it. They drew pictures of the school, its entrances, its exits. They knew exactly the sports stars that they envied over us ordinary students, he wrote. There was one especial jock that he was envious of, whose girlfriend he coveted. You see, envy is not only a sin, it's actually one of the most destructive forces in our lives. And it's an emotion that isn't easily detected in those who possess it. Most times, envious people seem normal, kind, friendly. But Scripture says the heart of man is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? If I, the Lord, search the heart, I test the mind to give every man according to the fruit of his doings. Jeremiah 17, 9-10. You and I, as God's people, representing God's hands, feet, eyes, and ears on earth, absolutely cannot let envy find any place in our mind. Proverbs 14:30 says this, "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." Pretty strong language. Jesus said, "Love does not envy." 1 Corinthians 13:4. There are many books. I have researched for a month, and I am stunned by the amount of literature and scientific studies on envy. I had no idea. Each author or researcher seemed to be searching for a root cause, of this sinful, destructive, almost universal emotion. I was really surprised. But it's accepted by most people as normal. When envy is, in fact, an emotion that if we harbor it in our mind, will keep us out of heaven. Envy is pure, unadulterated wickedness straight from the pit of hell. Max Lucado, in his book, A Love Worth Giving, which is a great book, writes this: suppose you spotted a flame, a little fire in your house. How would you react? Would you shrug your shoulders and say, a little fire in a house never hurt any house? I don't think so. He says, of course not. You would put it out immediately. Why? Because you know, if left unattended, fire consumes all that's consumable. And for the sake of your house, you wouldn't let the fire grow. Song of Solomon, chapter 8, verse 6, says, envy is cruel as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire. Solomon was right. Envy is a mental fire that we either stop immediately or fan it into flames in our minds, into greater sins. It's mentally, physically, spiritually destructive because it makes us miserable. It causes us to be mean. It destroys our happiness. And it spreads in our mind until all of our thoughts are consumed with the envy. There seem to be 4 characteristics of envy in the research that lie at the heart when we are envious of somebody or something. First characteristic is that we compare ourselves to others. This tendency to constantly compare ourselves to others is the breeding ground for envy. Psychologist Rachel Andrew, I liked the things she wrote. She said, our use of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat amplifies a deeply disturbing psychological discord. In the past, she's talking about her clients. In the past, she had clients who envied their friends or their neighbors. But social media has made everyone in the entire world accessible for comparison to yourself. And it is interesting that research shows that we only compare ourselves to those who are similar to us in age and background and circumstances. We avoid comparing ourselves to people who have lives that are simply unattainable for us. You know, you men don't compare yourselves to LeBron James. We don't compare our paycheck to Bill Gates. And I sure don't compare my home to Martha Stewart. You know, people that are way out of our league don't bother us at all. It's because we focus on those whose lives are similar to ours, those with whom we often associate, that envy can become so deadly. The second characteristic of envy is we want what is yours, and we want you to lose it. In wanting what's yours, our envy manifests itself in 3 areas. 3 areas you have that we want. The first is personal traits. We envy and want your abilities, or your physical looks, or your intelligence, or the fun-loving life you seem to be enjoying. And we want it. And if possible, we would be real happy if you lost it. The second area is possessions. We envy and want your home, your car, your clothes, even your spouse. And we want them, or we want to figure out a way that if possible, you lose it. Third, status. We envy your job, your social standing, the admiration you seem to receive, the vacations you take, your awards and accomplishments. We want them. And we would like to figure out a way to have you lose all of it. Psychologist Pamela Pelledri says in her book is Envy in Everyday Life. It says, envy is wanting to destroy what someone else has, not just wanting it for yourself, but wanting other people not to have it either. Envy has become a deep-rooted issue where a person is very, very resentful of another person's looks, success, happiness, money, home, car, whatever Satan can possibly tempt us to envy. This sin is silent, it's destructive, it's underhanded, it's pure malice, it's pure hatred, with a strong urge to annihilate anything that seems to be a blessing to others. The third characteristic of envy is that we want others to envy us. If we're honest, we want to have it all. We like other people to measure themselves against us and find themselves wanting. This is how we feed our ego. Intentionally or unintentionally, wanting others to envy us manifests itself in one of two ways. First, we brag about things in our lives, either verbally or by our behavior. You see, nobody cares if your child attends Charlotte Latin School and makes straight A's. Nobody cares at all if you drive a $28 million Rolls-Royce boat-tail automobile. We don't care. Mark Twain said something that I never realized until I studied for this. He said, "A man will do many things to get loved, but he will do all things to get himself envied." Secondly, we hide things that damage how we look to other people. We try to maintain the appearance that life is easy for us. The fourth characteristic of envy is we secretly want others to fail. And if they do, we feel better about ourselves. And when someone fails, it brings us joy. Now, I believe there are at least 90% of you that are sitting there saying, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm not envious of anybody. I won't ask you to raise your hands, but I know that's how you feel, because that's how I felt when I started studying. Consider the research in the field of behavioral neuroscience. Researchers at the National Institute of Radiological Sciences in Japan in 2009, and I could put the next hour, fortunately I won't, and show you the brain testing. They asked, this is a study dealing strictly with envy and how it changes our brain. The subjects were told to imagine confronting somebody they truly envied. And they, in their mind, began to think of the person they really envied. When they did, brain regions registering physical pain were aroused. The deeper the envy, the more vigorously flared the pain nodes. in the brain's dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the related areas. On the other hand, when they asked the subjects to imagine the downfall of that person that you envied, think about what you could do. Guess what happened to the brain? The pleasure circuits were activated, and the livelier the person thought about getting rid of that person they envied, the dopamine-rich pleasure centers of the vertical striatum of the brain lit up. And I could do another hour of showing you research. This means that we could actually become addicted to thinking about somebody's downfall because it's a pleasure operating center in our brain. It may not startle you, but I was startled by the research. But what I found odd is Aristotle, who lived 400 years before Christ, wrote this: "We experience pain at the sight of another's good fortune, stirred by those who have what we ought to have." There are thousands of stories of people's lives ruined by envy. On January 6, 1994, figure skater Nancy Kerrigan was hit in the leg by a baton-wielding attacker hired by the ex-husband of her rival skater, Tonya Harding, shortly before the figure skating's national championships. Now, the winners of the national championship would go on to the 1994 World Olympics in Lillehammer, Norway. Harding had been the first American woman ever to land a triple axel in 1991. But at the 1992 National Championship, she lost the ability to do that triple axel move. She always skated erratically if Kerrigan was watching. In fact, if Kerrigan was in any competition with her, Harding always had difficulty with her performance. So she agreed to have the hitman take Kerrigan out of the national competition any way he could. He chose the baton to the knees. Following Kerrigan's attack, Harding absolutely nailed the 1994 competition routine, including the triple axel, winning the gold and guaranteeing her a spot at the Winter Olympics. It was the last high point in her skating career. In the weeks between that national competition and the 1994 Olympics, Kerrigan's knee healed. When both women competed against each other in Lillehammer, Norway, in the 1994 Winter Olympics, Kerrigan won the silver medal. Harding placed 8th. After the Lillehammer Olympics, proof of Harding's part in the plot to cripple Kerrigan was made public, and Harding was stripped of her national championship and banned for life from competitive ice skating. Envy ruined Harding's career. James 3:16 says, "For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you have disorder and every evil practice." Envy left unchecked in our mind allows Satan to plant evil thoughts, evil actions. We literally, mentally become Satan's slave. And we find the sin of envy scattered throughout the stories of the Bible. In fact, the first crime the Bible mentions is in Genesis chapter 4. Abel. Abel was keeper of the sheep. Cain was a tiller of the ground. God instructed them to bring a lamb for a sacrifice. Cain disobeyed God. He brought his own offering. Abel obeyed God, brought an animal sacrifice. We know fire came from heaven and accepted Abel's offering, rejected Cain's, and you know the result. In an envious rage, Cain murdered Abel because he could not tolerate God preferring Abel to him. Genesis 29, Rachel and Leah, both married to Jacob. Leah was envious because Jacob loved Rachel the best. Rachel was envious because Leah had kids. We all know that long story of strife and never-ending heartache. Genesis 37, Rachel died, and Jacob made Rachel that he loved, the son of Rachel that he loved the most, a special coat of many colors, envied by all his brothers. Joseph's brothers were so envious, in fact, that when they had an opportunity, they planned to kill him. The older brother, Reuben, talked them out of killing him, talked him into, let's just sell him into slavery rather than killing him. We all know that story too. As God used Joseph in Egypt years later to save Jacob's entire family after the brothers repented of their envy. 1 Samuel 18, King Saul drove himself crazy, literally, because of his envy for David. Jesus addressed the sin of envy in several stories. In Matthew 20, Jesus said the kingdom of God is like a householder who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for work in his vineyard. Some he hired at 6 a.m., some he hired at 9 a.m., went back at noon and hired some more at 3, hired some more at 5 o'clock, an hour before quitting time. And when it came time to pay them, he paid them all exactly the same wage, regardless of how many hours they had worked. Can you not imagine? That's not fair. Those who worked from 6 a.m. were furious that those who had worked 1 hour received the same pay. Envy made them furious. The householder said, "Can I pay anybody whatever I want to, so long as I pay you what we agreed on?" Says, "You have no quarrel if I pay you what we agreed on." Jesus' story says, don't compare yourselves to others. In Luke 15, Jesus told another story about envy, displayed by the elder brother of the prodigal son. It isn't fair that my younger brother should receive a welcome home party like this when I stayed home all these years and worked like a dog for you. My prodigal brother's out partying, having a high life. Why are you throwing him such a banquet? The father said, "Why aren't you rejoicing that the one who was lost in sin has come home and will now be saved?" See, the Bible clearly points out that God's blessings, His mercy, His grace will go to anyone who responds to Him. Whether we respond all of our lives from the time we're a little kid, or whether we respond on our deathbed. But I think this parable of Jesus also can be understood by His grace. God's riches at Christ's expense is grace. We live in a society that says you get what you work for, whether it's grades, salary, friendships. And from a human point of view, it makes life sometimes seem very, very unfair. I went to school with people that made straight A's, that hardly looked at a textbook. Did any of you have anyone in school with you like that? The A's I got, I studied and studied and studied for. You see, when we begin thinking that's not fair, I should be able to fill in the blank. Satan is weaving a web of sinful, corrupting envy into our minds. And we forget we have no right to envy. God sent his Son to die for every sinner. And that gives God the right to bless anybody however they see fit. You see, we can look at others and find many things that are unfair, can't we? Why does Rosa hurt all the time and you don't? Why do a couple of you have cancer and the rest of us don't? Isn't fair, is it? We can always look at somebody else's life, and we can say, that's not fair. But is God fair? Is he just? Is he going to do whatever it takes to save us? Yes. Thank you, Father. Channelview, Texas is a typical bedroom community of nice homes, nice cars, nice families. Competition is fierce in all sports, but especially in cheerleading. Amber Heath and Shanna Holloway lived right around the corner from each other, and they had been friends for years. Amber was president of the student council. Shannon was the vice president. Their mothers were said to be wonderful friends. The girls went to the same private Christian school, and the moms took turns driving them to school. Everything was fine between the two families until the 6th grade. That's when Amber beat Shanna for cheerleader. And envy took deep root in Shannon's mother's mind. The two girls had always competed against each other, but Amber always seemed to get the edge over Shanna. Shanna's mom, Wanda Holloway, who attended a local evangelical church several times a week, in fact, she was the church organist, began to resent the pattern of her daughter consistently losing out to Amber. She even tried unsuccessfully to get Amber disqualified from the cheerleading competition on a technicality, but the coach ignored her. One year, she showed up at the school the day the students were voting for the cheerleading candidates and handed out rulers and pencils bearing a slogan, Shanna Holloway for cheerleader. But as a result of her mother doing that, Shanna was disqualified. Finally, envy became rage. Shanna's mother could take it no longer. She hired a hitman to kill both Amber and her mother. Trying to find someone to do the killing for her, she mentioned it to her former brother-in-law, who notified the police. And the police wired a detective who posed as the hitman. According to the tape recording, the hitman told her that he would kill the mother for $5,000 and the daughter for $2,500. Mrs. Holloway couldn't come up with that kind of money in cash, so she gave the hitman the pair of diamond earrings that she wore as a down payment for killing just the mother. She was arrested for soliciting capital murder and sentenced to 15 years in jail. However, because of a technicality, she later got out of jail after only 6 months. Envy ruined her life, brought public disgrace, wrecked 2 families. On the screen is Shannon and Amber today. Shannon is here, and Amber is there. As you can see, they're both beautiful women. Shanna speaks out for the first time this year, 20 years later. She's married with 3 kids. She tells how her mother destroyed her life when she didn't even want to be a cheerleader. Her mother wanted her to be the cheerleader. And Amber speaks about how it ruined her life and her family's life. I learned something else preparing this sermon, and I've read the Bible through, I think, 3 times. I missed it. Every time you read it, you hit something new. Did you know that it was the priest and rabbis' envy of Jesus that got him crucified? My mind skipped right over that when I was reading. Pilate didn't want to crucify Jesus. Matthew 27:18 says, "For he," Pilate, "knew that it was out of envy that they, the Jews, had handed Jesus over to him." I know of a man, after being head elder of a Christian church for 20 years, left the church when a younger man was selected by the nominating committee to be the head elder. He refused to lay hands of blessing on his replacement. Just in case you think envy doesn't enter the church. The head elder is saying, in effect, I'm not just obsessed with my own happiness, I resent yours. What abominably wicked, horrendous behavior. It's no sin to be tempted, but it is a sin to harbor any envy in our minds. Harboring envy in our mind. It actually says to God that you have given me, the life you've given me isn't quite good enough, Lord. To be happy, I need to be in first place. I need to be top dog. I need to be seen as the best. I need everybody to look up to me and respect me in whatever situation I'm in. And if you don't favor me, flatter me, pump me up, I don't like you. And I'll get rid of you if I can. What a terrible way to live. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Proverbs 14:30. Envy kills from the inside out. Consider this story by Steve Malone in his Love Does Not Envy series. A happily married man likes his job, lives in a beautiful home, has a good relationship with his kids, teaches a church at class. All in all, if you asked him, how's your life? He would say, I have a great life. Until he received an invitation to attend a reunion, a 20-year reunion from his college graduation class. At the reunion, he quickly discovered that many of his former classmates made a lot more money than he did. Some had exciting jobs, were traveling to exotic places around the world. The other spouses seemed more educated and attractive than his wife. The man wasn't even done with his appetizer before it became obvious that a large number of former classmates had attained higher social, academic, professional status than he had in the past 20 years. When he returned home from the weekend, he was distressed by a sense of failure. He questioned his self-worth. He began to show signs of resentment towards his wife. He began to harbor a secret animosity toward his successful fellow alumni, and he decided, I hate them all. And he began to entertain thoughts of ways he could know people that knew people and how he could maybe bring some of them down. He would be happy if they failed. Did he make less money? No. Had his job description changed? No. Did his wife suddenly become unattractive? No. Did the folks at church still like his Bible study? Yes. Nothing was different Monday morning than it was on Friday when they drove to the reunion. Nothing except his attitude. He had been burned by that deadly flame of envy. Envy can even afflict someone who knows the Bible, who knows Jesus commanded us to love one another. 1 Corinthians 13:4 tells us, love does not envy. We cannot love somebody and envy him or her at the same time. It's impossible. Because envy is a form of hatred straight from Satan. 1 John 4:20 says this, if anyone says, I love God, yet hates his brother, he is a liar. For the person who does not love his brother he has seen cannot love God that he has not seen. There are two ways to keep envy from entering our minds. First, in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. 1 Thessalonians 5:18. Give thanks for everything. I'm thankful if I wake up in the morning on the top side of the grass. You see, the second thing is celebrate. Celebrate everything all the time. You might be thinking, what if I don't feel like celebrating? Person has way more than I do. Why should I celebrate them? Give thanks for your family, your friends, your job. Celebrate them until it becomes second nature and a habit. Hey, your friend gets a new boat, new car, new home, new motorcycle, whatever. Call them up. Let's celebrate. Let's go ride in your new boat, your new car, or whatever it is. Let's have a party. Envy rots your bones. Especially if they get a boat. Let's celebrate it. Let's see if they got skis to go with the boat. You see, our envy doesn't hurt our friends at all. Someone got the promotion at work you think you deserve? Celebrate them. Let's go have lunch and celebrate your promotion. Be sure you pray with them for success in their new job. You can't envy somebody you're praying for. Keep in mind one truth of life. Promotions don't go to the most qualified. Promotions go to those who have everybody's interest at heart. Everybody knows you're their friend and that you love them. And don't forget birthdays. Birthdays are the perfect time to celebrate others. We're pretty good at that in this church. This is one of the things I love to do. Most of you know that. I use any excuse for a party. In fact, when I die, I have instructed my friends, my family, I do not want a memorial service. I'll tell all of you this. You hear me? I want my kids to rent a venue, and I want you to have a big party. Everybody, come to the party. Come and celebrate. You see, if we really want to break the mental grip of envy, develop the habit of thankfulness for everything, and use every occasion, whatever happens, to celebrate. Satan simply cannot start the flashing flames of envy in a mind of a thankful, celebrating person. I wonder sometimes what the beings on other worlds watching us think of our decisions to let Satan so easily conquer our minds. 1 Corinthians 4, verse 9 says, we are a theater to the universe. They watched Jesus leave heaven. They watched him be born as a man. They watched him give his life on a horrendous cross to save us. When God has made it so evident that sinful humans are worth his life, they must look at us and see what we do and say, boy, are they dumb. How frustrated God must be at trying to get us to understand how much he loves us. It reminds me of the story I read about a statue of Myrna Loy. She was a famous Hollywood superstar in the 1930s and 40s. And William Van Ogden watched all of her movies. She was his idol. In 1921, when Myrna was 16, she was a student at Venice High School in California, and her high school art teacher, Harry Weinbrenner, sculpted a statue of her and two other students posing in the fountain in front of the school. Her statue stood atop the fountain for over 70 years until vandals wrecked it in 1979. William Van Ogden was an amateur sculptor, and he couldn't stand his idol being vandalized. He promptly donated his time, his materials, his talent, and repaired the Myrna Loy statue. In 1980, the vandals wrecked it again. Ogden repaired it again. 1981, the cycle repeated. Every year, he spent the last 10 years of his life repairing the Myrna Loy statue after the vandals destroyed it, until he died with cancer in 1989. A few years later, the fountain was removed and a fence was put up around the statue. Then in 2010, a bronze version of the statue was erected in front of a modernized school, and it still stands to this day. William Van Ogden would have been very pleased that his idol now has a permanent, indestructible statue there. Let me ask you this. How would we feel if we were a creator and we created something beautiful, something worth saving, something that would last for all eternity, and someone kept coming along trying to destroy your prized creation? Even worse, suppose your creation kept cooperating with the destroyer because he couldn't see the beauty that you had invested in it. Each of us is God's beautiful handiwork. We are a one-of-a-kind masterpiece. God's love for us makes us eternally valuable to him. That's why he gave his son to die in our place. We can't compare ourselves or our value to someone else. It would be like comparing the value of Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa to Rembrandt's portrait of Katrina. Both of these paintings are worth almost $1 billion. They are priceless, irreplaceable, invaluable. So are we. Each of us is priceless, irreplaceable, invaluable to God. We don't have to prove to anybody that we're somebody. We don't have to tear anybody else down to build ourselves up. There's not another being in the entire universe like you or me. That's a reason to be thankful and celebrate. We should have a DNA party, don't you think? There is no space for envy in the minds of God's people when we realize we're one of his masterpieces. When we understand that we are loved by God beyond anything we can imagine with an everlasting love. We are far too valuable to let Satan into our mind, take over our emotions, to envy anybody. when he's preparing a place in heaven for those who love him.